Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Randy Bock. Today's April 20, 2022, and I'm going to turn on my super duper light also uh, because it is actually beautiful out today. We're getting some sunlight, but the sun is going to be setting shortly, and that'll leave us in the dark a little bit. Hopefully not metaphysically, because we have the light of knowledge. Is a little bit slow in coming. Everybody's aware that a couple days ago, perhaps, a federal judge of some type somehow took the masks off in the airlines. And I think the TSA is now relaxing this as well. So domestic flights and probably international flights as well, emanating from the United States, will be maskless. There were cheers, literally, on the airlines, and people were just ecstatic in mid-flight. They heard about this. So I know there were some flights where the stewards and stewardesses or flight attendants came around and were willing to take and put the masks in the trash. Not for everybody. There's a few clingers, bitter clingers, as President Obama once called the right, clinging to their guns and so forth. Well, people cling to other things. They cling to bad theories. They cling to their fears. And as one of my commenters here says, follow the science, but in this case, the political science. That's probably been where it's been at all along. That might be a one preposition too many, because that's where it's been at. There's a great joke about ending a sentence with a preposition. Guy goes to England, and back in the day when people were a little bit more stuffy, and he says, "Can you please tell me where the restrooms are at?" And says, "Well, in England, we never end a sentence with a preposition." Says, "Oh, I'm really sorry about that." It says, "Excuse me, can you please tell me where the restaurants are at?" Bleep hole, bad word. And anyway, that's little mores are different from place to place, and that has that it's not the joke, not quite pertinent, but it does point out how different things are from place to place, not because of the facts, not because of the science, but because of the way people want things to be, or the things they try to shoehorn into other aspects. And we're going to cover some of that tonight. I want to begin with a note of shameless self-promotion and self-congratulation. I worked really hard on getting my book out, Overturning Zika, and you can buy it on Amazon in the Kindle form. The paper versions I've had to rework because Kindle's a tough thing, or Amazon Publishing. This is KDP, I think it is, Kindle Direct Publishing. And so I'm having some graphics people kind of rework some of my images and figures and so forth, so they come out sharp or sharply in the print version. So I hope you will navigate to find it. It's a pretty simple title, Overturning Zika. And, in science, I mean, sometimes, law is not science, but I'll give law credit. They document things and they have to have argumentation, and it'll either go through a judge or a jury. It doesn't mean they're always perfect. I mean, I think OJ killed his wife, and what I can't remember Mr. Goldman's first name. I think he's vigorously slit her throat, apparently all the way back to the cervical spine. So he nearly decapitated her, and he certainly acted guilty and so forth. So juries aren't perfect, and judges aren't perfect, and all that kind of stuff. But in science, you might think that let the science, let the experts speak, let the science figure it out. This is, questioning science is science, as we've discussed here many times. And my book questions the very shoddy science that went into the Zika declaration of a Zika pandemic, and specifically the association with microcephaly, of which there may or may not actually have been an increase in Recife, Brazil, spelled Recife, Brazil. And I learned so much with this book and from this book that I hope you will entertain my my mad delirium and my frankly, I think quite thorough research. It became a joy to find out more and more. And it's also been an element of frustration because I've actually had elements of this story for about 3 years now, and I've tried to engage the major news outlets on it, and without that much success, to be frank. I had the two erstwhile editors, chief editors of the JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, on a video conference. And much as you're seeing me, I hope and presume, I was seeing both of them. And weirdly enough, they have been woke, cancel culture, defrocked from their offices. They're still both MDs, medical doctors, but for totally different and frankly superfluous and bizarre reasons, they both relinquished their thrones as chief editors of JAMA. And right, this is before, I think it was in early winter of 2020. I had the basis of my kind of Zika expose, which has now been published in the American Journal of Medicine, AJM, and it's called Investigating the Zika Microcephaly Crash. If you want to find that, it shouldn't be too hard. And they were both interested. This is Livingston, Dr. Livingston, I presume, and Dr. Bauschner. And they couldn't really assail my facts or anything like that. And they said it's very interesting, and ordinarily we might publish it, but we don't want to cast doubt on the public health establishment. And I think this is kind of wrong think, to quote Orwell, 1984. The public health establishment would have much more weight if they were, willing to admit the times they made mistakes, and they acted accordingly. I have been a parent now for 30 something years, and I think when the kids are little, they think you're perfect. As they get older, they understand you're not, and that point varies of enlightenment varies from person to person. I remember, I'm not sure exactly what age, maybe 9 or 10. I was thinking, my mom tells me this stuff, and does she have any real basis? Does she have any grounding, or is she just going by her whims? And I don't think I was super rebellious, but there are points at which are very reasonable to question the science, such as it is presented, because a lot of it's just dictate, and nobody really should manage like that. I mean, if you're a king, yeah, sure, you can do that for a good length of time. And I think historically, humans have been ruled by kings. I'm not sure that says more about humans or more about kings or power structure or the nature of armamentariums. But we currently don't have that, and we should do our best to question and query, much as they do in the court of law. And I don't think the Constitution is a living document. I think it says what it says. Interpretations vary, and then people can debate it, and they can bring it out in the front. And with science, there's no specific court of law to adjudicate something like Zika microcephaly. The jury will be out. I mean, part of the reason I chose Zika microcephaly is I chose it before COVID, because I thought it was really odd that it was a huge pandemic in 2015 and 2016, and then just completely disappeared, but nobody disavowed it. Everyone stuck to their guns on this topic, and that's strange. But then when I wanted, it was my bad timing, I guess, and the world's bad timing in general to have COVID-19 come along. But then it was like to be crowded out, and nobody would touch my thing. But anyway, the Zika is still a great story because we have enough passage of time to see and reckon with the decisions that were made, and whether those were valid, and whether the public health people were really serving the public health or themselves, or sticking around a narrative so that they couldn't ever be doubted later on. I think part of what's important to them is to be obeyed, and that is not necessarily how we should be treated. Maybe subjects and slaves, possibly. There's another comment here. I'm going to leave the comment right there. It's kind of complicated, peripheral to what I want to get at right this second. But so I would recommend you look at my book, because this we have there was a passage of a pandemic. It was it was literally the top medical news story of 2016, and it's all gone. And nobody's apologizing, nobody's going back or anything like that. So I'm going to read you I got an article published in the Washington Examiner which is probably the only real newspaper in Washington, D.C. I don't know if you've followed the story of the reporter. I think her last name is Lorenz. And somebody made a mathematical joke that this is the Lorenz transformation of the Washington Post. Although, I think they had been transformed. Democracy dies in darkness, they say. And I'm not sure that what type of kind of darkness they are applying, whether they're contributing in this event, because she went and doxed the interesting and funny libs of TikTok Twitter account, and all the woman does, her name is Chaya something. She lives in London and really bright gal, and all she does is just translate. She doesn't alter, doesn't comment or anything. She just takes progressives ranting so forth on TikTok and puts it on another platform. That's all she did. And the Washington Post doxed her, which is release all her personal information and basically try to put the hex and the scourge of the mob upon her. And mentioned her religion for whatever reason. I don't know. So the Washington Post is what it is. It certainly has the larger circulation, but the Washington Examiner is a great paper, and I'm very proud to have my piece there. And I'd like to maybe spend the time and just show it to you and read it to you, and we'll see whether there's any relevance to things that are going on now. So this the topic of this just came to me kind of coincidentally to the vaccines and so forth. I've written a book on Zika, but I kind of needed the final chapter. And I was like wondering, here we are talking about COVID vaccine over and over again. Whatever happened with the Zika vaccine? We've had so much more time, and Zika and dengue are almost identical. I'll show you a picture in a second. And there is a dengue vaccine, but nobody's made one for Zika. Like, what happened? And that kind of unleashed a whole series of questions. And they had the weird thing is Zika had disappeared so thoroughly, but they still had this money. They had $500 million of Zika funding, of which they had not fully run out, and they wanted to get a vaccine. So the weird thing is, once Zika had disappeared from the world's health concerns, they didn't have enough people basically on whom to test a vaccine to see if it worked. So the idea then was, idea was to go infect people with Zika who didn't have Zika so they could test the Zika vaccine. And this is a weird thing. It's called a human challenge trial. And the ethics of such are questionable. And the public health establishment, NIH and NIAID and so CDC, were burned by the Tuskegee experiment, about which many people have heard, where people were given syphilis originally at a time when there was no cure for syphilis. So that was the beginnings of it. I think the 20s were not so bad, but it got continued on into the 40s, I believe, at a time in which penicillin did exist, and nobody informed the older gentlemen, for the most part, who had syphilis, that this was the case, that it could be treated. So they chose to follow their symptoms along rather than treat them. This is your public health establishment. At the time, a lot of it was brought up as a racial issue, but the Tuskegee Institute, as you might know or recall, is one of these historically black colleges, and I believe basically all the researchers were black, although some of the people from the CDC coordinating were not. Anyway, it was made into a big racial thing, but frankly, it's not so much a racial thing, in my view, as kind of public health overlords going for something esoteric and refined, which also happens to pay them research dollars. So the research aspects, sometimes supersede the actual public health aspects. And I think coincidentally in time, there was a similar experiment, as it were, a human challenge trial in Guatemala, where they took prisoners. We paid Guatemala to take their own prisoners, and I guess they gave them a night of making whoopee, which maybe some of the prisoners, were happy to avail themselves of, but they brought purposely syphilis-infected prostitutes to the prison. So this is not necessarily the brightest chapter in our public health establishment. And to wit, when there was suggestion early on in the Zika pandemic and our response to it that we go and infect people with Zika, they made an ethics panel. They spent $1 million plus on convening dozens of ethicists at the end of 2016, and by 2017, early like February 2017, they came down with their edict and the tablets or scrolls were read, and it was like, no, don't do a human challenge trial for Zika because it's preventable, insecticides, and so forth, and it's not uniformly fatal, and the rate of microcephaly so rare, et cetera, et cetera. So the ethics panel decided that this was not something worth having a human challenge. As we headed into 2018, um, Dr. Fauci, I've got a quote that didn't make it into the final article, but basically he was ready, willing to go ahead and infect people anyway. And they wanted to do it in Brazil and possibly 10 other sites in Latin America, but principally in Brazil, a few sites in Brazil, because that was the source and site of the original supposed pandemic. And Brazil's FDA, it's called Anvisa, ultimately turned them down. And that's despite, the potential of getting $100 million in a place that's relatively impoverished. I'm not sure all the money would have gotten to them, but certainly some of the subjects would have been paid or paid off in order to get Zika. But Brazil had enough of Zika, they didn't want it coming back. And there's always the potential when you infect people with Zika that mosquitoes might infect themselves and then transinfect other people with the Zika later on, and or pass it, communicate it through sexual contact. So, Brazil, despite the Fauci pressure and so forth, took a hard pass on this, and that there the trail went cold. So that was 2018. There was a big article in Science about this, and I was trying to finish my chapter for my book on Zika, and the trail went cold. Like, what's going on with the Zika vaccine? So I picked some of the names from the article, and I sent out some emails. And Dr. Anna Durbin from the Bloomberg Institute of Public Health in Johns Hopkins, Baltimore, was kind enough to respond. We have a communication. It's pretty curt on her side, but she did let me on that she's going to, intending to go ahead and do a Zika human trial challenge in the United States. It's actually going on right now, from what I can tell, and I can show you the documentation. But anyway, I'm going to head over and read the article to you because I can, and you don't have to listen. You can fast forward, and we're going to go over some things that are going on oddly and animically in the world of COVID as well. So let me see if I can just get over here. As a primer, I'm just going to show you a picture of. Let's see. There's, I guess, this picture here, just for argument's sake. This is dengue, and this is Zika. Now there's no color at this microscopic level, so they made these things look actually more different from each other than they are. Dengue on the left, Zika on the right. If you do the black and white version, which I have separately, I could. It's going to take me a little bit of work to show it, but if you just kind of squint, or you'll see that there's really no distinguishing feature difference between these two. They both look like these soccer balls with the pentagonal aspect to it, and they are genomically and genetically almost identical. So they come from the same exact family. Dengue's closest non-dengue. There are 4 strains of major strains of dengue, but its closest viral relative is Zika, and vice versa. So amongst all the thousands, or I don't know how many viruses that there are around, these two are kissing cousins. They're almost identical. But dengue has caused illness, and Zika never did. Dengue has millions of cases of without microcephaly, and Zika had very few, and supposedly with. But I think a lot of that fell to the wayside. So here's the Washington Examiner article. Titled "The Zika Vaccine Never Was. Its experimental trial should never be." My original title was "Zika's Very Human Challenge," based on the human challenge trial. And this is, I guess, somebody getting specimens of mosquitoes and so forth. And the vaccine is being administered to at least 80 healthy individuals at 3 sites around the country. So Johns Hopkins Center for Immunization Research, and I apologize for reading this, but I think there's some good information in here, is enrolling otherwise healthy medical subjects to be injected and infected with Zika, the virus associated with microcephaly that created a global panic in 2015, 2016. Undoubtedly, care is being taken so that Zika won't escape via sexual activity or an unseen mosquito bite by locally endemic Aedes albopictus. Now, this is a relative of Aedes aegypti, which is in the tropics. This one actually goes to temperate regions. Whether it can carry Zika or not is unknown, hasn't yet. But anyway, but the mosquitoes are almost identical, just like Zika and dengue are almost identical, to cross-infect and contaminate the region. But even with precautions in place, the question arises, why are government-funded investigators 6 years after the Zika epidemic vanished, deliberately infecting U.S. citizens now? This rather unusual human challenge trial seems to be the public health response to the question of what had kept the well-funded, long-promised, but unrealized Zika vaccine from completion and distribution. Despite 2 years of frenetic activity, beginning with a $400 million appropriation in September 2016, the Zika vaccine endeavor lost steam because there was no there, to quote Gertrude Stein, her talking about Oakland. Zika's abrupt disappearance had eliminated the background incidence of natural infection that was necessary to validate vaccine trials. This is why, even though pharmacological science and industry were thus able to produce a COVID-19 vaccine within a year, the Zika vaccine efforts have gotten nowhere. In 2018, researchers attempted to circumvent the problem of Zika's absence by promoting a Zika human challenge trial, that is to infect you. This meant infecting healthy Brazilian subjects with a virus that had stopped infecting people. In personal communications, Johns Hopkins Dr. Anna Durbin revealed that Brazil's version of the FDA had refused to conduct such experiments. For that reason, she set out to conduct such an experiment stateside. Is Dr. Durbin correct in doing so? Understanding Zika microcephaly's recent trajectory helps in this decision. In 2015, the Zika microcephaly pandemic took hold in Recife, Brazil. Flavivirus Zika, for decades seen as harmless, was now suddenly deemed responsible for congenital microcephaly, small heads, diminished intellect. Massive panic predictably ensued. Clinical tests for Zika did not exist until after the peak, and microcephaly determinations had no firm diagnostic standard for frequency comparisons within Brazil nor in any prior registry. Ultimately, only 1 in 20 microcephaly diagnoses persisted under later review. In January 2016, the WHO's Bruce Aylward acknowledged, in any unfolding crisis, you're dealing with a lot of uncertainty, including the precise nature of any link between Zika and microcephaly. By February 2016, the WHO had pivoted, declaring Zika a worldwide public health emergency. The CDC then issued a travel advisory for 14 Latin American countries. Debate arose over canceling the Olympics in Rio de Janeiro, what I call Rio, 1,500 miles from the outbreak's epicenter. Brazil's military was mobilized for insect reduction. Health ministers led by WHO-aligned experts recommended that women forego childbirth completely and indefinitely, anticipating a near future Zika vaccine for their populace. I'm just going to pause for a second. This is something not even COVID-19, the most vigorous of those worried about that recommend for us, and that is to stop having children completely. This is not really been seen since World War II and the Nazis directing it at a certain fraction of their population, Jewish and whatnot, that people stop having childbirth. But yet this was recommended, and certain of the health ministers in various countries in Latin America and parts of Brazil recommended the same. This is really shocking. Federal funds, and again, they would still be waiting because there's no vaccines ever since. Federal funds of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, NIAID, were even borrowed from other purposes to create such a vaccine. This was before the appropriation in 2016, presuming that active infection would persist. It did not. Institutionally haunted by fallout from the Tuskegee and Guatemala syphilis human challenge experiments, NIAID sponsored an ethics panel in late 2016. It concluded by specifically forbidding any sort of human challenge trial involving Zika, given that the disease is non-fatal and avoidable. But NIAID's Dr. Anthony Fauci, apparently ignoring the ethics panel's advice, endorsed a Brazilian trial of this kind in 2018, all the while acknowledging that Zika may have been a one-hit wonder. It's a risk that you'll spend this money and never use the vaccine, he said. The New York Times adequately summed up the controversy at the time, noting that although scientists were saying a human challenge trial is necessary to prevent a future epidemic, bioethicists had concluded the research had insufficient value to justify the risks. I'm going to highlight that phrase. Ultimately, Brazil chose NIAID's ethics panel over its official recommendations. It stands to reason. In fact, every further Zika vaccine tax dollar represents waste, fraud, and abuse. To infect humans so long after Zika's disappearance implies either a harmless virus or a heartless study. Either possibility undercuts the rationale. Dr. Durbin sees Zika as both dangerous and dormant, cyclically awakening. With only one data point, this is unverifiable. She kind of has a view of it a little bit like locust that's going to come back. I think this is hasn't happened. Anyway, in 1965, Dr. Irwin Schatz, father to Hawaii's senior U.S. senator, objected to the NIH's use of impoverished test subjects as collateral damage in the Tuskegee study. In its earliest phases, before penicillin, Tuskegee had diagnostic value. The real sin was in its continuation, willfully ignoring changed medical circumstances, endangering subjects, and aggrandizing observers. Let's learn from our errors and stop this Zika human experiment. If a Zika revival warrants this vaccine's revival, then there are more robust interim vaccines that will bridge the gap. That's me. Overturning Zika is the book. And investigating Zika microcephaly's crash. So you can take a look at both of these at your leisure. And there's the book, and the article is here. They're the article's obviously a shorter read, technically coming out in July, but it's already been up since February. So you can take a look at that. We go over a lot of the stuff ranging with Zika. Anyway, let me just come back out of this for a second. So I don't know why this needs to be done right now. We've learned so much about vaccines that if Zika, were a thing, certainly Brazil would clamor for it. Brazil said no, yet we are saying yes. Why is that? I think that has a lot to do with some of the, we could be a little bit cynical, and some of the rationale that people have for doing this, which is self-aggrandizement. You publish, in academia, you either publish or you perish. And while you're publishing, you certainly get grants, and the grants can be lucrative. Again, nearly $500 million has been spent on the Zika vaccine. There's no vaccine. I like to give credit where credit is due. Mr. Trump's organization of Operation Warp Speed, relatively speaking, was warp speed. So you should take some solace in that. Leaving aside, whether the vaccine, is overforced on people. That's another topic. Anyway, that's kind of my Zika vaccine stuff. I hope that kindles, no pun intended, some interest in you. And what else do we have? Well, while I was looking at that article, one of the ads, I don't know if you saw it, in the Washington Examiner, was pointing out. So we're going to make a little segue. We're going to go back into COVID stuff. So it mentioned that I found this hard to believe. The city of Philadelphia is going to reinstate an indoor mask mandate, the first major U.S. city to do so this spring. And so you got to wonder, like, why? What's going on? And somewhere along the line here, I have here it's Pennsylvania. As far as I remember, Philadelphia is in Pennsylvania. This is the stuff going on now. Daily new cases. You're talking about this down here. This is not even a blip. What's going through their head? I have no idea. This is 2020 major COVID. This is the Omicron wave when it was a lot of cases, people getting sick with basically what's kind of a bad cold. And of course, there were very few fatalities, relatively speaking. Some of these are residual from Delta. But overall, there's nothing going on. There's no deaths. People do die. I forget the population of Pennsylvania precisely. I think it's around 20 million or something like that. But whatever the number is, I think it's you're expecting maybe 600 deaths a day anyway. In the normal population, you're talking about 9. And again, you don't really get to see a lot of the breakout of the data, but these are likely elderly. The United States not having an issue, we're turning the other way. What's up with that? I don't know. But, similar things are going on in other places. We mentioned last week what's going on in Shanghai, China. Here's a video which is really sad. I'll play it briefly. This is kind of the discord when government is running the show. These are trash bags all piled up. A lot of this is just rotten food. People, the government workers are paid the same amount to deliver it or not deliver it, most likely. And this is what you're getting. So people are I don't think literally they're starving, but they're certainly hungry, sitting in their apartments. And Why are they doing this? They're doing it for a piece of COVID that has really nothing to do with anything. It's they're looking at it from and kind of a authoritarian way. They it has the word coronavirus in front of it, but this current coronavirus is an Omicron, and it's pretty mild. Um, so what they're trying to do here, this is a really cool graphic. Shows the urban density, ambient density of Shanghai. Most of your cities in the United States, and what London, I think, has its peaks right around here. Shanghai, Hong Kong have huge densities. So they're trying to corral virion that can go from person to person to person to person in a city which has effectively the highest densities on planet Earth. So how do they do that? They lock people up. Um, uh, and what do? They keep people quarantined. Here's basically a pen. I can make this a little bigger. Uh, where people who are completely asymptomatic to begin with are being shuttled off here because they had a positive test. Craziness. Do any of them look really sick? No, they do not. They look bored, and this is people having their rights taken away. Good luck with this. This is I mean, maybe the people get away with it in the meanwhile, but I'm not sure about the long run. This is corroborated. Associated Press talks about letting Shanghai allowed 4 million more people out of their homes Wednesday as coronavirus rules eased. Almost 12 million people of the city's 25 million can now leave their homes. Yay! After the city imposed lockdown starting March 28th. So we're talking about 3 weeks ago and more. This is and then there's a food crisis here. This one is talking about the man-made food crisis. Same thing I had in a previous video, that food just goes to waste because the workers who do this get paid regardless of how well they do it or not. There was another picture, I'm not sure I can find it, showing how kids are supposed to go to school in basically these huge hazmat suits. I don't get it. I saw on the Babylon Bee kind of a funny meme that schools are going to school's going to be held in airplanes so the second graders can finally take their masks off. So how do they come up with this stuff? I don't know. They do, and you have to be on guard. I mean, Ronald Reagan said famously, the scariest words on earth are like, "I'm here from the government. I'm from the government. I'm here to help." Their version of what is right for you doesn't necessarily coincide with what actually is right for you. So I'm going to leave that there and take a break. I hope you enjoyed what we had to cover tonight. Maybe just check for a second if there's anything else that I missed that's vital for you to know in our absence. I think that pretty much covers. There are probably some few other things, but I can catch up with them next time. We're probably going to be morphing this, hopefully, if things quiet down, unless we turn all into Philadelphia based on political science rather than science. And I'm looking for other topics. I have some other books in the works, and we're going to be morphing a little bit to do, general health concerns. So if you have questions, things you'd like me to address, I'm a primary care physician with long experience, and hopefully I can provide some value and interest for you as time goes on. Anyway, thank you so much for attending. Please, feel free to pass this along, share it as you would, and I appreciate any book sales. And if you can leave a review, that would be helpful. A better review is even better. Good reviews and so forth. I look forward to talking with you again. Thank you so much, and have